waves, which can travel faster than light, and that they're actually being hurtled backward in time. The closer we get to the event, the greater the radiation density. Hence, the more frequently and intensely we experience paranormal phenomena associated with it. We'll ask about that, by the way. We haven't yet. This could be the mechanism behind what you call the quickening. The event we are approaching will probably be something tantamount to a white hole or a mini Big Bang. It will, for all intents and purposes, be the end of time for us. Terence believes it will occur consistent with the Mayan calendar in the year 2012. Now, by the way, he has derived this independently of the Mayan calendar. He simply has discovered that it coincides with it. He goes on, it is not unreasonable to assume that ETs possessing UFOs, if they exist, will be flocking here to research, or rather pre-search, the phenomenon. It is also believed that tachyon bombardment would have bizarre effects on the human nervous system, visions, that sort of thing, as well as physical manifestations in the environment, like the Clearwater Virgin, bizarre mutations like the chupacabra, and heaven knows what else. All the stuff you attribute to the quickening might be explained by this. And after listening to the first hour, I must agree, Terence, I'm stealing one more bit of time to read you a fact that I think relates and challenges you a little bit. It is from Stephen in Wichita, and it's well thought out. Here it is. Art, I'm not sure that you can equate novelty with either acceleration or complexity. Nature has always been novel, and surprisingly so, considering earlier periods in Earth's history. Given that over 90% of all species that have ever lived are now extinct, and the exotic body designs, it would seem novelty is a given. But in order to be effective, it must have a survival advantage and be passed on. Once the novelty becomes a hindrance, it disappears. Acceleration may be more a factor of population density. Virtually all of the social problems we face today have been duplicated years ago in rat population density studies. Our novel inventions of this century have simply allowed us to artificially compress distance and time by modes of travel and communications. Profit motives have directed and limited the novelty of our civilization in this century as never before, and we are becoming a hindrance. The higher the population density, the more the acceleration seems to be. Anecdotal but relative. Compare the pace of a small country town to a large city with its population density and resulting problems accelerated by stress and profit motives. That's from Steve in Wichita. What do you think, Terence?
Well, I don't disagree with all of that. I think there's certainly been ebb and flow of novelty within the 20th century, parts of it more novel than others. But I think to argue that it isn't among the most novel periods in time is a pretty uphill battle. The question is whether novelty is something which simply adheres to statistical dynamics, or whether it's a real direction, a real arrow that is directing process, and that's what I maintain. I think it's not true to say that the biota of the Earth today is not more novel than it was in the past. Certainly there are novel forms of life which have undergone extinction, but the proliferation of human life, which is an advanced animal plus a culture-creating creature, indicates to me that we're at a level of novelty that this planet has never before experienced. Of course, it's an arguable thing because history, which is what we're always comparing these waves to, is not yet a quantified thing. I mean, how do you rate the War of the Roses over Queen Anne's War or something like that? But nevertheless, though we don't have an absolute quantification of history, there is general agreement among historians that events like the Renaissance, the Greek Golden Age, the 20th century are periods where a great deal of novelty in social forms and technologies was concentrated.
All right, you put together a computer program
Correct.
which which was able to trace the ebb and the flow of this novelty and, in effect, chart major events in history. How many, if I might ask, hits and misses when you got this in final development, and then you look at each point in history, how many hits and misses? Were there any misses in the model, or did you hit each major moment in history on the nose?
Well, by my understanding of this theory, there can be no misses. In other words, it's not a statistical theory. We're not okay if we're right 2/3 of the time.
Hear, hear.
So we have to be right all the time.
So you're telling me you are?
I submit to you and to the world for your examination and critiquing the fact that, yes, the time wave, with its end point in December 21st, 2012, described with as great an accuracy as I am able to discern the actual vicissitudes of novelty and habit in history and natural history. That's the claim. That's right.
Terence, have you submitted this? I mean, this is serious science that you're discussing. Have you submitted this because of its repeatability? That's science. Now, have you submitted this to peer review?
Well, among mathematicians, yes, and there's a lively debate raging on the Internet about that. Let me say something, though, here about science and why the acceptance of the time wave can't really occur under the tent of ordinary science. You have mentioned repeatability. Repeatability is the idea at the very basis of the scientific method, at the very basis of experiment.
That's right.
It's what's called restoration of initial conditions. But now notice that what the time wave theory is saying is that every moment in time is a unique moment.
Is unique and will not specifically repeat. But what you're suggesting is that you can plot the highs of novelty throughout history.
Yes, you can, but you cannot assume that you're doing it probabilistically. In other words, essentially, when you really understand philosophically what the time wave is saying, it's an enormous attack on probability theory. You know, the way science works now is if you want to know how much energy is flowing through a wire, you take 1,000 measurements, you add them together, and you divide by 1,000. And then you have the current flowing through the wire. But notice that that assumes that it doesn't matter what time you make the measurement. And so much of science is like this, to the point where I am redefining science and saying science is the study of those phenomena so coarse-grained that the time in which they occurred does not affect them. And that leaves out, then, history, love affairs, corporate takeovers, empire building. Everything interesting in the human world is too fragile, too finely embedded in the context of its time to be open to that kind of scientific modeling.
Mm-hmm. So, in other words, they're really relatively small, insignificant events that don't enter into the larger measurements you're making of this ebb and flow.
Well, for instance, on a given day when the chart says novelty will be high, certainly somewhere in the world someone is having a very unnovel day. It's a statistical thing, a bell curve, no reference to you, Art, but a bell curve where when the wave is predicting high novelty, most people, most systems will experience that novelty, but of course some will not. It's the idea that probability is ebbing and flowing. You know, when you study statistics, the first thing they teach you is when you flip a coin, the odds are 50-50, heads or tails. If that were true, the coin would land on its edge every single time. That's the rarest of all results in a coin toss.
Indeed.
So what's really happening is that what are called secondary and tertiary factors are causing the coin to be heads or tails. I say no. There are zones in time where heads are favored and zones in time where tails are favored. the idea that time can be described as a perfectly smooth surface and then dealt with statistically is just a first pass with Greek